Political philosophy isn't exactly rock and roll, but still, my guest today is a thinker who's been likened to early Elvis Presley. Loud, dazzling, and possibly dangerous. Slavoj Zizek's blazing critique of liberal capitalism has won him admirers around the world, and plenty of enemies too. How seriously should we take a man who sees the good in Stalin and says communism is the ideological answer to the 21st century's ills? Slavoj Zizek, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thanks very much.
We speak 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and many in the West are celebrating the triumph of liberal capitalism, liberal democracy, and yet you seem to be lamenting. Isn't that perverse?
I'm definitely not lamenting the fall of the wall. If I may boast a little bit, I even participated in it. I was unemployed for a couple of years in the 70s. I was some kind of a dissident, very much engaged in oppositional activity in the last years. No, all I'm saying is something very simple, that what happened, what we have now, is not what the people expected, A, and B, that you cannot put this disappointment simply at the expense of the immaturity of the people. You know, like people had naive representations of capitalism, they didn't know what is coming, and so on and so on. So let me make one...
Do you feel you have the right to say that? I mean, after all, you're from Slovenia. Now,
yeah.
Slovenia wasn't surrounded by a wall, but it was part of Tito's Yugoslavia. It was communist, and it didn't have the freedoms that were seen in Western Europe.
Oh.
And do you think it's fair to say that the people of Slovenia, still more the people of East Germany or the Czech Republic or Slovakia, are not actually really enjoying the freedoms that they now have, that they certainly did not have before
Wait a minute.
89?
Let me make one point extremely clearly. I think that the communism of the 20th century, more specifically all the network of phenomena we refer to as Stalinism, are maybe the worst ideological, political, ethical, social, and so on, catastrophe in the history of humanity. And for me, it's a...
I find that hard to accept. I mean, you wrote in a recent... Well, you say it now, but you've written many different things. You wrote, for example, quote, better the worst Stalinist terror than the most liberal capitalist democracy. Those words taken from one of your books.
Okay, I will not go now. It will take half an hour to explain how I mean this. I meant simply that the communist regime started as a way of, through the revolution, of opening a space outside the existing capitalist ideology and so on and so on. But then, as I always emphasize, things went terribly, terribly wrong. Even if I may make a counter quote, I even claim that if you measure at some abstract level of suffering, Stalinism was arguably worse than Nazism, because even in the worst of Nazism, the victims were somehow, how should I put it, selected according to some criteria. If you were a Jew, a communist, whatever. In Soviet Union in the late 30s, the contingency was total. The party started to eat itself. Everyone... if you were, the most dangerous place to be was almost at the top of the nomenclatura. So my obsession almost with Stalinism is there is something so mysterious that went on there that we cannot yet really even explain it. Fascism is much easier to account for in the terms of the crisis of capitalism than the fascist dream of alternate modernity, that is to say, you remain capitalist but with an authoritarian structure and so on.
So can we be clear then? In your view, was or was not communism a catastrophic failure?
Total failure.
Total failure. So why do you still call yourself a communist?
Because what I think is that communism was an answer to a series of problems. It looked in the throughout 1990s. For a decade, we had what I ironically refer to as the Fukuyama dream. We were all
Francis Fukuyama. We've reached the end of history.
Yes.
This is
he was not as stupid, as naive as he somewhat sometimes portrayed. Yes, he's not saying, "Oh, it's the end." He knows things are still moving. There are but his idea is just that with liberal democratic capitalism, we found, if not the best possible, at least the least bad system.
And he suggested that here was a global consensus, and that it would gather in people across the world.
My thesis is what we witness in the new century is the gradual disintegration of this consensus. For me, wouldn't you agree that even the majority of leftists today, they are let's call them ironically, Fukuyama leftists? Because nobody even talks today, about these old big questions. Is capitalism here to stay? Is democracy, is the state here to stay? In the same way that
I would absolutely agree with you, and I would therefore conclude that you are desperately and terribly isolated today.
I'm not as isolated, unfortunately, as it may appear to be, because, just let me finish. So the majority of in the same way that when I was young at least, we were dreaming about, remember, socialism with a human face. Now it is as if our utmost horizon is global capitalism with a human face. So and here we come to the point, the only serious question that I see today is precisely this one. Is, in the broadest terms, the liberal democratic capitalist framework the absolute horizon so that we can make it better, more tolerant, better welfare, but we stay? Or are there phenomena for which it is reasonable to surmise that even in the long or even in the mid-term, it will not be possible to resolve them or even to cope with them within this frame? I think there are.
And your argument seems to be that in the last decade we have seen two hugely symbolic events, symbolic but also very real events, which have undermined and exposed the vulnerability of liberalism and capitalism. That is the sort of bookends of the decade, the 9/11, and then at the other end of the decade,
the first
financial
one,
collapse.
the end of, let's call it this naive belief in liberal democracy as the universal answer, the end of the decade, the financial crisis as the end of this at least naive economic liberalism.
And I would put it to you that far from being the exposing of liberal capitalism's weakness, what we have seen with both, in many ways, is the resilience, the adaptability, and the long-running strength of liberalism and capitalism.
Let me make something clear. I'm fully aware, I'm not one of those crazy leftists who thought a year ago, oh, you see, the crisis is here, let's get ready for the next phase, socialism or whatever. I am also fully aware of how, except of some old Keynesian formulas, I'm not aware of any convincing radical left alternatives. But let me tell you something else.
That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? If you're saying capitalism, liberal capitalism is dying, but